Enjoy it, Sarah. This is the last joke at my expense.
My name's Nathan Pierce, and I need to tell you about the night my wife decided to humiliate me in front of 50 people at the fanciest restaurant in town, and how I discovered that champagne tastes like battery acid when you're swallowing it alongside public betrayal. I'm not the type who makes scenes. I don't throw drinks or flip tables. But that night, something fundamental shifted inside me, and I finally understood what 5 years of financing someone else's dreams while being treated like furniture actually meant. Let me set this up properly. I'd spent 3 solid weeks planning this graduation dinner for my wife, Sarah, who just finished law school. And look, I was genuinely proud of her. She'd worked incredibly hard, pulled all-nighters that would destroy most people, and memorized more legal jargon than seemed humanly possible. So, yeah, I wanted to celebrate her properly. I booked the Harbor Club, this absurdly expensive seafood place downtown where the bread comes with a backstory and the waiters act like serving you water is a personal favor. The kind of restaurant where valet parking alone costs what most people spend on groceries. But this was Sarah's night, and I was determined to make it perfect. I handled absolutely everything. Sent invitations, coordinated with her anxious mother about seating charts, confirmed our private dining room 3 separate times because apparently that's what you do when you're married to someone whose family treats every event like a presidential inauguration. I even spent an entire evening ironing her parents' matching navy blazers because her father Thomas showed up at our place the day before with wrinkled jackets that looked like they'd been wadded up in a duffel bag since the Reagan administration. He looked at me with those watery eyes and said, "Son, think you could help me out with these?" And like the complete fool I was, I said sure and spent 45 minutes watching YouTube tutorials on proper steaming techniques. The dinner started fine if you consider fine to mean awkwardly navigating conversations with people who'd never bothered learning what I actually did for a living. Sarah's law school friends arrived first, this collection of sharp-dressed professionals in designer suits who all had the same aggressive handshake and practiced laugh that sounded like inherited wealth. They clinked glasses, toasted to justice, and other abstract concepts they'd probably forget the second they landed corporate positions, and I smiled and nodded like one of those dashboard bobbleheads. Her professors showed up too, these academic types who spent the appetizer course explaining legal theories to each other in increasingly pretentious voices as if the rest of us couldn't possibly grasp the complex nuances of constitutional law. Spoiler, we didn't particularly care. I sat there in my off-the-rack suit from Macy's, the one I'd bought on sale because despite what some people apparently thought, I wasn't made of money, and I watched my wife absolutely shine. She wore this emerald dress that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her dark hair pulled into one of those supposedly effortless updos that actually takes forever to create, and she was holding court like royalty. People kept congratulating her, telling her how brilliant she was, how far she'd go, destined for greatness. I sat there thinking, yeah, she really is incredible. Look at what she accomplished. Look at what we accomplished together. How beautifully naive of me. That's when she stood up. The room went quiet with that expectant silence you get right before someone makes a speech. Sarah picked up her champagne glass and smiled, this absolutely radiant smile that I'd fallen in love with 5 years earlier. Everyone leaned in, eager to hear what brilliant Sarah Richardson had to say. I thought maybe she was going to thank me, acknowledge the sacrifices we'd both made, talk about how we were a team. "I want to take a moment," she said, her voice carrying that confident projection they'd taught her, "to acknowledge my husband, Nathan." She gestured toward me with her glass, and I felt this weird mix of hope and dread. "Everyone, this is the man who's been by my side through all of this. The man who supported me emotionally through every late night, every breakdown, every existential crisis about whether I'd chosen the right path." She paused for effect, and I swear I saw the punchline coming a full second before she delivered it. Emotionally, but not intellectually, because, let's be honest. Here she laughed, this light, crystalline laugh that invited everyone to join in. No degree, no plan, just living off my income and fixing things around the house. But hey, every successful woman needs a good handyman, right? The table absolutely erupted, volcanic levels of laughter. Her best friend from law school, this woman named Claire, who'd never said more than 3 words to me in 5 years, literally spit her wine back into her glass. One of the professors, this distinguished-looking guy with a silver beard, actually started clapping like he'd just witnessed the world's greatest comedy routine. Thomas was chuckling and shaking his head like I was some lovable sitcom character. And Patricia, my mother-in-law, had this satisfied smirk on her face like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally say what they'd all been thinking. Even our waiter, some kid who couldn't have been more than 22, cracked a smile before catching himself. I sat there with my champagne glass halfway to my lips, my face frozen in what I desperately hoped looked like a good-natured smile, rather than the mask of complete devastation it actually was, and I felt something inside me fundamentally shift. Not break exactly, more like realign with reality. Suddenly, with absolute clarity, I understood that I'd been financing my own humiliation for 5 solid years. Every tuition payment, every sacrificed weekend, every time I'd worked double shifts so she could focus on studying. It had all been building toward this moment where I got to be the punchline at my own expense, at a party I'd paid for, celebrating achievements I'd funded. When the laughter finally died down to scattered chuckles, I stood up. Every eye in that room turned to me, probably expecting me to laugh it off, play along, be the good sport who could take a joke. Instead, I raised my glass, looked my wife dead in the eye, and said in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly level, "Enjoy it, Sarah. That's the last joke you'll ever make at my expense." Then I set down my glass, adjusted my jacket, and walked out of that private dining room with my head held high. No yelling, no dramatic speeches, no throwing things or making threats. Just one quiet man who'd finally realized that loyalty without respect is just a fancy word for doormat. I walked past the shocked faces, past the suddenly silent table, past the concerned-looking hostess, and straight out into the parking lot where the night air hit me like a revelation. I stood there next to my truck, pulled out my phone, and typed 4 rules into my notes app, my fingers shaking slightly from adrenaline or rage, or maybe just the pure relief of finally standing up for myself. Don't text her back. Document everything. Protect my peace and my paycheck. Never confuse loyalty with stupidity again. I read them twice, committed them to memory, and felt the night breeze on my face. It smelled like freedom mixed with fury, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like the main character of my own life, instead of supporting cast in someone else's story. I drove to my best friend Eric's apartment in complete silence, which was unusual for me because I'm normally the guy who needs music or podcasts to keep my brain from spiraling. But that night, I couldn't handle noise. I needed quiet to process what had just happened, to let the full weight of my public humiliation settle into my bones. Eric Martinez had been my closest friend since high school, back when we were both young and stupid, and thought we could conquer the world with nothing but ambition and terrible haircuts. While I'd gone into construction, Eric had followed his passion for cooking and now ran a food truck called Soul Tacos that served Korean-Mexican fusion and had a cult following among the downtown lunch crowd. He lived in this converted warehouse loft in the Arts District, the kind of place with exposed brick and pipes running across the ceiling. I texted him from the parking lot. "You home? Need a place to crash. Long story." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Doors open. I've got beer and leftover bulgogi. Come on up." This is why Eric was my best friend. No dramatic questions, no demands for immediate explanations, just an open door and the promise of food. Eric opened the door before I could knock, took one look at my face, and said, "Oh man, this is bad, isn't it?" He was wearing his standard off-duty uniform of cargo shorts and a faded band shirt, his dark hair sticking up in 7 different directions because he'd probably been napping on the couch. "It's epically bad," I said, walking past him into the loft. Titanic hitting the iceberg levels of bad. I collapsed onto his beat-up leather couch that he'd found at an estate sale and claimed had character, which was code for multiple mystery stains. Eric disappeared into his kitchen and returned 90 seconds later with 2 beers and a pizza box that he dropped on the coffee table like a sacred offering. "Talk," he commanded, settling into his armchair. "What happened? Did someone die? Did your truck finally give up? Did Sarah turn out to be a Russian spy like I always suspected?" I laughed despite everything, popped open the beer, and dove into the whole story. I told him about planning the dinner, about ironing her parents' matching blazers like some kind of domestic servant, about the fancy restaurant and expensive wine, and how I thought I was doing something nice for my wife. Then I got to the toast, and I watched Eric's expression shift from curious to shocked to absolutely furious in about 30 seconds. "She said what?" Eric interrupted when I got to the punchline. No degree, no plan, living off her income. Dude, you've been paying her tuition for 5 years. You've been keeping her afloat this whole time. Living off her income? She doesn't even have an income yet. She's been living off your income. I know, I said, and hearing someone else articulate what I'd been thinking made it feel more real, more valid. And everyone laughed, man. Her parents, her friends, her professors, they all thought it was hilarious, like I was the court jester whose entire purpose was to be the butt of the joke. Eric opened the pizza box and shoved a slice at me with aggressive care. You married a TED Talk in heels, he said, shaking his head. That's exactly what she is. Today, I'm going to talk about how I'm amazing, and everyone who isn't me is basically decorative furniture. That made me laugh for real, the first genuine laugh since walking out of that restaurant. And she probably has a PowerPoint, Eric added, with graphs showing her superiority and pie charts breaking down why her husband is basically a glorified appliance. So, what did you say? He asked. Please tell me you said something. I told her to enjoy it because that was the last joke she'd ever make at my expense. Then I walked out, didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just left. Eric whistled low. Stone cold. That's impressive, man. Most guys would have either exploded or just sat there and taken it. You did the dignified middle finger. He grabbed another slice. So what now? You going back tonight, tomorrow? Are we in divorce territory or just really bad fight territory? I don't know yet, I admitted, pulling out my phone. But I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. Document everything. Let me back up and explain how I got here, because every disaster needs context. I met Sarah 5 years ago at the campus ID help desk where I was moonlighting to pick up extra cash. My actual job, my real career, was running a small construction management company that I'd started right out of high school when everyone else was applying to colleges. While my former classmates were debating philosophy and getting drunk at frat parties, I was learning to read blueprints, manage subcontractors, and turn a profit on residential renovation projects. It was blue-collar work, but honest work that paid real money and taught me practical skills. Sarah burst into my office one Tuesday afternoon like a tornado in designer jeans, her dark hair falling out of a messy bun, mascara smudged under her eyes, suggesting she'd been crying or rubbing her face in frustration for the past hour. Please tell me you can help me, she said, genuine panic in her voice. My thesis file corrupted, and I have a presentation in 3 hours, and if I don't recover this document, I'm going to have a complete breakdown right here in your office. I took her laptop, ran some recovery software, and managed to retrieve about 90% of her document while she paced around my tiny office like a caged animal. You're literally saving my life right now, she kept saying, which I found both charming and slightly concerning. When I finally handed the laptop back with her thesis intact, she looked at me like I'd just pulled her puppy out of a burning building. I owe you, she said. Coffee. Dinner. My firstborn child. I laughed and told her coffee was fine, mostly because I figured that would be the end of it. Girl gets her thesis back, buys the IT guy a thank you latte. Everyone moves on with their lives. Except Sarah didn't let it end there. She showed up the next week with actual homemade coffee cake, which she claimed was a family recipe, but later admitted she'd found on Pinterest and stress-baked at 2 a.m. The week after that, she started dropping by to chat between classes, asking about my construction projects with what seemed like genuine interest. I love that you actually build things, she'd say. Everyone here just talks and theorizes. You make real things that people can touch and use. That's so refreshing. Looking back now, I can see red flags I missed. But at the time, I was 24 years old, running my own business, and this brilliant, beautiful law student was choosing to spend her free time in my cramped office. She'd tell me about her cases and classes, about her dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney and changing the world, and I'd listen, like she was describing the greatest story ever told. We dated for 8 months before I proposed, which everyone said was too fast. I proposed at a construction site, actually, this gorgeous Victorian house I was restoring. I'd brought her there at sunset, showed her the work we'd done on the crown molding and original hardwood floors, and I told her I wanted to build a life with her the same way I built houses, with careful planning, solid foundations, and commitment that lasts generations. She cried and said yes, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest guy in the world. When we got married, she was starting her second year of law school, and I was riding high on successful commercial projects. We had this unspoken understanding that I'd be the financial anchor while she focused on school. She had dreams of changing the world through legal reform, and I had dreams of literally building it. For a while, it genuinely felt like a partnership. We'd stay up late talking about our future. She'd open her own practice. I'd expand my company. We'd be this power couple proving you didn't need two lawyers to make it work. But somewhere along the way, and I can't pinpoint exactly when, the narrative shifted. I went from Nathan Pierce, successful business owner and equal partner, to just Sarah's husband. At law school events, people would introduce themselves to her with enthusiasm and barely glance my way. Nobody asked what I did for work. Nobody cared that I was running projects employing 15 people and generating 6 figures annually. I wasn't wearing a suit and quoting Supreme Court cases, so I was invisible. Her friends were the worst. This crew of ambitious law students who all seemed to shop at the same expensive stores and share the same worldview that equated education level with human value. They'd come over to our apartment, the apartment I was paying for, and sprawl across our furniture, drinking wine I'd bought, complaining about their caseloads while completely ignoring my existence unless they needed something. Nathan, can you grab more ice? Nathan, do you have a charger? I became the guy who fetched things and stayed quiet. Back at Eric's apartment, I started compiling what essentially amounted to a financial autopsy of my marriage. I opened my laptop and started going through 5 years of bank statements, printing everything out, watching the pattern emerge. Every month, like clockwork, deposits from Pierce Construction Management followed immediately by withdrawals for Sarah's tuition, books, rent, everything. It was like watching a financial vampire drain my accounts in real time. The tuition payments were the most painful to catalog. Fall 2020, $8,800 to State University School of Law, paid via check from Nathan Pierce. Spring 2021, another $8,800. Summer session, $4,500 for some accelerated constitutional law course she'd insisted was essential for her career. Every semester, same pattern, all from my accounts, with Sarah's contribution hovering somewhere between 0 and "I'll pay you back when I'm making lawyer money, babe." That promise aged like milk in the summer sun. Then there were the apartment leases. We'd moved 3 times during her law school years. First because the original place was too small and didn't have good natural light for studying. Then because the second place was too far from campus. Finally to the luxury apartment downtown because by 3rd year she needed to project success to potential employers. Every single lease had my name as primary tenant, my income as qualifying factor, my signature accepting financial responsibility. Sarah's name was there too, but only as co-tenant, and her listed income was always either student or that part-time paralegal gig she'd worked for exactly 4 months before, deciding it interfered with her studies. I found receipts for everything. The law school bookstore where I dropped $895 on textbooks for her second-year courses. The professional clothing store where I'd bought her 3 suits and 4 blouses because she needed appropriate attire for mock trial competitions. $1,300 that I'd mentally categorized as an investment in our future, but now recognized as funding her costume for a play where I was the comic relief. And then the graduation ring receipt. Her class ring, the one she'd shown off at that disastrous dinner purchased on my credit card for $680. The receipt even had a little note saying, "Congratulations on your achievement," which felt like a cosmic joke. But the real discovery came on day 5 of my archaeological dig through our financial history. I was reviewing transfers from our joint account when I noticed a pattern of regular transfers to an account number I didn't recognize. Not huge amounts, usually $200 or $300 at a time, but consistent monthly transfers going back almost 2 years. I called the bank, spent 20 minutes on hold, and finally got a human who confirmed there were regular transfers from our joint account to an external savings account. They couldn't give me details without authorization, but they could confirm the transfers had been initiated by Sarah Richardson using her online banking credentials. An escape fund. She'd been siphoning money from our joint account into a secret stash, money I'd deposited, building her lifeboat out of materials I'd paid for, all while maintaining the facade of a loving marriage. I calculated the total of those transfers, roughly $7,200 over 2 years. Not a fortune, but enough to cover first and last month's rent on a new apartment, or a good lawyer for a divorce, or whatever escape plan she'd been quietly assembling. I made copies of everything, organized it into folders with labels that would make a librarian weep with joy. The grand total came to just over $132,000 that I'd spent on her education and living expenses over 5 years. $132,000 invested in a partnership she apparently saw as charity. Eric helped me pack everything into banker's boxes. "You know what you need?" he said. "A good lawyer, and I know exactly who to call." The next morning, I called the number Eric gave me for a lawyer named Helen Brennan, who his cousin had used for her divorce. When a woman with a voice like bourbon answered, I cut right to it. My wife publicly humiliated me at her graduation dinner after I spent 5 years financing her law degree. I need to know my options. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Oh, I like you already. Come to my office at 11. My rate's $350 an hour for consultation." Helen Brennan's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. The lobby had that sterile corporate aesthetic, all marble and chrome. When I arrived with 3 boxes of documentation, her assistant actually looked impressed. "Miss Brennan is going to love this," he said, helping me carry the boxes. Helen stood when I entered, and she had the kind of direct eye contact that made you feel like she could read your thoughts. Maybe 40 years old, dark hair and a sharp bob, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Miles Carter," she said with a grip that could crush walnuts. "Have a seat and tell me everything. Don't leave out details, no matter how embarrassing. I've heard worse." I launched into the whole story. How Sarah and I met, how I'd supported her through law school, the financial sacrifices, and finally the graduation dinner disaster. Helen listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, and her expression remained professionally neutral until I got to Sarah's toast. "Wait," she said, holding up one hand. "Let me make sure I'm understanding correctly. You financed her entire legal education to the tune of how much?" $132,000. Her eyebrows went up slightly. "You financed her education for $132,000, supported her through 3 years of school and various unpaid internships, and then she publicly rebranded you as her charity case in front of her colleagues, professors, and family." "That's about right," I said. And everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Helen leaned back, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Congratulations, Mr. Pierce. You've just graduated from Naive Husband University with honors. Welcome to the real world. The good news is you're done with the education phase. Now, let's get you your refund." We spent the next hour going through everything I'd brought. Helen asked pointed questions, made more notes, occasionally muttering things like "unbelievable" and "the audacity" under her breath. When we got to the secret savings account transfers, Helen actually put down her pen and looked at me with something approaching respect. "She was building an escape fund using money from your joint account. That's premeditation, financial manipulation, fundamental violation of marital trust. That plays very well if this goes to court. It shows a pattern of calculated behavior." When I left her office an hour later, Helen walked me to the door and handed me her card. "Don't seek revenge, Mr. Pierce," she said, and her smile was sharp. "Seek receipts. They last longer and cut deeper." That night, after compiling everything, I sat at Eric's kitchen table with my laptop and composed an email. Not a long one, not an emotional manifesto. Just 3 short lines. "Hi, Sarah. Attached are financial records showing the true cost of your degree. Consider this a courtesy copy before my lawyer sends the official version. Best regards, Nathan." I attached a PDF summary of the financial evidence and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I poured myself a drink, raised the glass to Eric watching from the kitchen, and said, "To receipts. May they be permanent and devastating." My phone stayed silent for exactly 28 minutes. Then it started ringing. Sarah's name lit up the screen. Eric walked over, looked at it, and said, "Answer it. Put it on speaker. I want to hear this." I hit the green button. "Nathan." Her voice came through like a tornado made of panic and indignation. "You can't be serious. You're overreacting. That email, what are you thinking? Do you have any idea how unprofessional this is?" I let the silence stretch before responding in the calmest voice I could muster. "Overreacting? You publicly turned me into a punchline. You stood up in front of your colleagues and roasted me like I was the evening's entertainment. So no, documenting the actual financial reality of our relationship doesn't qualify as overreacting. It qualifies as fact-checking." "But everyone laughed," she protested, genuine confusion in her voice. "It was just a joke, Nathan. You're being so sensitive. Can't you take a joke?" "Exactly. I said, and Eric had to shove his fist in his mouth to keep from laughing. Everyone laughed. That's the problem. Everyone thought it was hilarious that you described me as a deadbeat with no degree living off your non-existent income that I've been funding for 5 years. The joke was so good that I decided to fact-check the punchline with actual bank statements. She started saying something about twisting her words and taking everything out of context, but I was done. Listen, I'm not doing this right now. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Have a good night, counselor. I hung up before she could respond. Eric immediately burst out laughing, slapping the coffee table. Dude, that was cold. Have a good night, counselor. You just dismissed her like she was a telemarketer. Beautiful. The next morning I was eating the breakfast burrito Eric had made me when my phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. Mr. Pierce, this is Robert Kane. I'm a senior partner at Kane, Morrison & Associates, the firm where your wife has accepted a position as a junior associate. He paused. I'm calling because this situation with your wife's comments at her graduation dinner has reached our office, and we'd like to discuss how we might resolve this matter discreetly. I nearly choked on my burrito. The email had made the rounds. Somehow my documentation had traveled from Sarah's inbox to her new employer's attention. Mr. Kane, I appreciate the call, but I simply sent my wife some financial documentation relating to our marriage. If that's caused problems at her workplace, that sounds like a conversation you should be having with her. There was a pause. Mr. Pierce, we're aware of the incident. Several of our attorneys were in attendance and word has spread throughout the firm. Combined with the financial documentation you've provided, there are concerns about professionalism and judgment we'd like to address before Miss Richardson's official start date. Would you be willing to meet with me and our HR director? We're prepared to make this worth your time. Worth my time. Code for, we'll pay you to make this go away. I told him I'd need to consult with my attorney and would get back to him. Then I immediately called Helen, who answered on the second ring. Sarah's new employer just called me, I said. Senior partner named Robert Kane. Apparently my email made the rounds and now they want a meeting to discuss the matter discreetly. He used the phrase, worth your time, which I'm interpreting as code for please accept money to shut up about this. The keyboard clicking stopped. Robert Kane called you directly? Oh, this is delicious. They're worried about reputational damage. When does he want to meet? We scheduled the meeting for 2 days later, which gave Helen time to prepare what she called the good folder, a comprehensive breakdown of my financial contributions, complete with summaries, graphs, and legal precedent. We're walking in calm and professional, Helen instructed. You wear your best suit, let me do most of the talking, and you do not apologize for anything. Understood? The morning of the meeting, I put on my best charcoal suit and met Helen in the lobby of Kane, Morrison & Associates. The firm's office was everything you'd expect. Expensive furniture, intimidating art, enough dark wood to have personally offended an entire forest. Robert Kane met us in a conference room with windows overlooking the entire city. He was exactly what I'd pictured. Mid-60s, silver hair, expensive suit, crushing handshake. Mr. Pierce, Miss Brennan, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to chairs. Can we offer you coffee or water? Helen set her portfolio on the table with a soft thud that somehow sounded threatening. Let's just get to business, shall we? She opened the portfolio and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. I watched Kane's expression shift from confident to concerned as he read the first page. The conference room fell into the kind of silence that usually precedes either a declaration of war or a really expensive settlement. Next to Kane sat Margaret Chen, the firm's HR director, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Kane set the document down carefully. Miss Brennan, these demands are extensive. You're asking for full financial reimbursement, a formal letter of acknowledgement, restrictions on Miss Richardson's public statements, and, he flipped to the second page, mandatory, firm-wide professionalism training using this incident as a case study. Helen leaned back casually. Mr. Kane, let me paint you a picture of what happens if we don't reach an agreement today. My client's story, complete with 5 years of financial documentation, showing how he funded his wife's entire legal education while she treated him like hired help, gets filed with family court. Those filings are public record. The press loves a good David versus Goliath story, especially when Goliath is a lawyer who publicly humiliated the man who paid for her degree. Can you imagine the headlines? I watched Kane's jaw tighten. Margaret leaned forward. Mr. Pierce, we understand you're hurt and angry. What happened was inappropriate, but surely you can see how public litigation would damage everyone involved. Helen put a hand on my arm. Miss Chen, my client isn't concerned about looking good. He's concerned about being treated fairly after 5 years of exploitation. The only person worried about reputation should be your incoming associate. She pulled out another document, the comprehensive summary with all the numbers. This is a breakdown of Mr. Pierce's financial contributions over 5 years. The total comes to $132,000, not including opportunity costs. There's also the matter of secret savings account transfers Miss Richardson made from their joint account. Kane picked up the document, expression growing more troubled. Margaret's eyebrows rose at the savings account section. We have multiple witnesses who can confirm exactly what Miss Richardson said, Helen continued. Several are attorneys from your firm. The statements are not only false but defamatory, made before legal professionals. Let's take 15 minutes, Kane said stiffly. Miss Chen and I need to discuss this privately. When they left, I turned to Helen. How do you think it's going? They're going to settle, Helen said confidently. Kane knows fighting publicly would be a nightmare. They're probably figuring out how to spin this internally right now. When Kane and Margaret returned 20 minutes later, Kane's entire demeanor had shifted to resigned. We're prepared to offer a settlement. Full reimbursement of documented expenses. Approximately $132,000 pending verification. We'll draft a formal letter acknowledging Mr. Pierce's financial contributions, and we'll include a confidentiality clause preventing Miss Richardson from making any public statements about Mr. Pierce. And the professionalism training? Helen prompted. Kane actually winced. Yes, mandatory training for all associates with a case study based on this incident, emphasizing professional boundaries and avoiding defamatory public statements. Helen smiled. Excellent. I'll have everything drafted this afternoon. As we rode the elevator down, Helen said, Congratulations, Mr. Pierce. You just got an expensive divorce settlement without actually divorcing. Though honestly, after this, I'd recommend filing anyway. Good, I said. Let her hate me from a distance, with a legally binding agreement. We stepped into sunshine, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. 6 months later, I'd transformed my pain into profit with Pierce Renovations and Life Consulting, half construction management, and half life coaching for people who'd forgotten how to build anything worth keeping, including self-respect. My first consulting clients were 3 lawyers from Sarah's firm who'd heard my story and wanted advice on protecting their assets. The irony was delicious with every invoice I sent. My new apartment was small but completely mine, filled with furniture I'd picked out myself and peace I'd earned. Eric started calling me the documentation king, which was better than the guy who got roasted at dinner. Sarah tried emailing once with a subject line that read, Maybe we can talk. And I responded with exactly 7 words. My hourly rate's $200. Legal advice extra. She never responded, which told me everything I needed to know about how much our talk was actually worth to her. 1 year later, I stood on a stage at a business seminar for men rebuilding after difficult relationships. The topic was how to stop being your partner's side project. My wife once introduced me as a man with no degree and no plan, I said, watching 300 faces lean forward. Turns out my plan was just waiting for the right exit. The laughter came, the good kind, with me instead of at me. Men lined up afterward to shake my hand and share their own stories. One guy told me his wife had sent him my video and they'd both learned something important. That felt better than any settlement check. Later, in my workshop, surrounded by tools and hard-won peace, I poured myself a drink and raised the glass to nobody in particular. Enjoy it, I said quietly, remembering that night at the Harbor Club. That really was the last joke anyone made at my expense. Because I'd walked away from being someone's punchline and built something better. A life where respect wasn't negotiable and dignity wasn't optional. Some conversations aren't worth having, especially with people who only value you when it's convenient. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's receipts, documentation, and the quiet satisfaction of proving that your worth was never up for debate in the first place.